Chairman, I want to start with that article in the New York Times today. It's called Crossing the Line, Trump's Private Conduct with Women. They did more than 50 interviews over 6 weeks, and they say they found repeated instances of Trump insulting women and making unwanted advances, even in the workplace. Chairman Priebus, does that bother you?
Well, you know, a lot of things bother me, Chris, and obviously I'm the wrong person to be asking that particular question. But look, we've been
wait a minute. Why are you the wrong person? I mean, you're the chairman of the party. This is your nominee, and they're saying that he has mistreated women over the years.
What I would say is, you know, we've been working on this primary for over a year, Chris, and I've got to tell you, I think that all these stories that come out, and they come out every couple weeks, people just don't care. I think people look at Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and say, who's going to bring an earthquake to Washington, D.C.? I think the bigger issue when we make these judgments about people are, you know, whether or not individuals are throwing stones in glass houses. And when people are hypocrites, obviously that's when these stories have an impact. But I don't think Donald Trump and his personal life is something that people are looking at and saying, well, I'm surprised that he's had girlfriends in the past. That's not what people look at Donald Trump for. And so I think the traditional playbook and analysis really don't apply.
But forgive me, it's not whether or not he had girlfriends. The question is whether or not he mistreated women, whether he made unwanted advances, whether he humiliated women in the workplace. I don't understand why you say that people don't care about that. And are you going to look into the allegations?
Well, look, I'm not saying people don't care about it. I'm just saying I think the reason he's where he's at is that he represents something much different than the traditional analysis of individual candidates. And yes, everything bothers me, Chris. But I don't know the truth of these things. I don't know, other than reading an article, whether or not these things are true. I think it's something that Donald Trump is going to have to answer questions in regard to. All I'm saying, though, is that after a year of different stories, you know, nothing applies. And so that's all I'm saying. And that I think the bigger question is, between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, who represents somebody that's going to bring a more efficient, accountable, effective government here in Washington? A career politician or a total outsider with potentially some flaws, and a businessman that can get something done? That's what this is about. Now, whether it's going to be a race to the bottom or not, I'm not sure.
I do want to ask you, though, because the question of character, particularly in a president, is important. And Donald Trump, Lord knows, has been bringing up Hillary Clinton's character and Bill Clinton's character. There's also a story in the Washington Post that Trump used to call reporters claiming to be a publicist named John Miller, but really it was Trump, to brag about himself and his exploits with women. Here's a clip from one of those phone calls back in the 90s, and then Trump this week denying that it's him.
He's somebody that has a lot of options, and frankly, he gets called by everybody. He's living with Marla, and he's got 3 other girlfriends.
It was not me on the phone, and it doesn't sound like me on the phone, I will tell you that, and it was not me on the phone.
But back in the 90s, Trump admitted to that reporter later that it was him, and he testified in a court case that he sometimes used the assumed name John Miller. I guess the real question is, what do you say, Chairman, to women voters out there who are going to hear these about Trump bragging about his exploits, about him allegedly mistreating women? What do you say to them if they have concerns and question whether or not they really want this man to be president?
I think that each individual person out there should evaluate our potential nominee based on the answers that he gives to these questions, but also look at what's at stake in this country and whether or not Hillary Clinton represents someone that's going to bring the needed change that we have here in Washington. And look, a story of 30 years ago and whether Donald Trump impersonated someone or not that he denies is really not the most important thing for us to talk about when you look at Hillary Clinton, and you look at the fact that just this past week the Clinton Foundation is being charged with exchanging access for cash. You've got 4 dead Americans in Benghazi, and instead we're talking about a planted story by somebody in the Washington Post from 30 years ago that really has no consequence at all to the issues facing this country. I think that's what every American is going to be faced with, is that fundamental question as to which person is going to bring a seismic change to Washington, D.C. And the old playbook, Chris, the same old analysis isn't applying in this election. And so I get that this stuff is interesting, but we've been through this, and it has not moved the dial one notch.